Wichita, Kansas. General Omar Bradley, America's last five-star general, the GI's general. The man who'd commanded 1.3 million men in Europe sat at his desk, hands trembling. Not from Parkinson's, from regret. He was writing a letter, not to his publisher, not to President Nixon, to Beatrice Patton, George's widow. The letter began. I told the world your husband was reckless, but privately I knew he was right about almost everything. He never mailed it. It was found in his locked desk after his death in 1981, next to his Medal of Freedom and a single photograph, him and Patton in Tunisia in 1943, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling like brothers. For 30 years, Bradley had been Patton's chief critic, the man who'd reined him in, the general who'd supposedly saved the army from Patton's madness. But in private letters, sealed interviews, and classified debriefings, declassified, only between 2015 to 2023 a different story emerges. This is what Bradley admitted when the cameras were off. When the memoirs were printed, when he'd spent decades being celebrated as the anti-Patton, the truth is more complicated and more damning. Let's go back to 1919. West Point. Bradley is a taciturn instructor. Patton is a flamboyant major, fresh from the Great War, already wearing his pearl-handled pistols. Their first meeting. Patton walked into Bradley's classroom, looked at the map of the Musagon and said, "Kid, you teach tactics like a man who's never heard a bullet snap past his ear." Bradley, according to his own diary discovered in 2017 in his granddaughter's attic, wrote that night, "Patton is either the most brilliant tactician I've met or the most dangerous fool. Time will tell. I pray I'm not in his chain of command when the bill comes due." Fast forward to 1940, Bradley is a colonel, buried in the War Department. Patton is already a general, lobbying for armored warfare. Bradley's wife, Mary, wrote to her sister, Omar says Patton will either be chief of staff or court-martialed by 1942. There's no middle ground with George. But here's the first admission that never made it into Bradley's best-selling memoir, A Soldier's Story. In a 1965 interview with historian Forrest Pogue, sealed until 2010, Bradley said, "I studied Patton like a specimen. I learned more about generalship watching him make mistakes than I did in 30 years of staff college. The problem was, his mistakes worked. The war would prove that again and again." February 1943, Kasserine Pass, the U.S. Army's first real test against Rommel. It was a disaster. American troops routed, tanks destroyed, morale shattered. Bradley was sent by Eisenhower to assess the damage. His official report blamed lack of experience and inadequate training. Privately, he blamed the British. In a sealed cable to Ike, Declassified 1975, Bradley wrote, "Montgomery's holding back support. He's letting us bleed to prove American incompetence." But Patton took command of the Second Corps and turned it around in 30 days. Bradley watched him do it. His diary entry from March 10, 1943, George arrived like a tornado, replaced commanders mid-battle, drove to the front lines, told men they'd fight or he'd shoot them himself. It's barbaric. It's also working. Here's where Bradley's first major admission comes in. The slapping incidents in Sicily, August 1943. Patton slapped his shell-shocked soldiers. Bradley was ordered to investigate. His official report recommended Patton be relieved. But in a private memo to Eisenhower discovered in the National Archives, 2018, Bradley wrote, "Recommend relief for public relations purposes only." Patton's value as a combat commander outweighs this incident by a factor of 10. The men he slapped will recover. The battles he'd win will save thousands. Ike kept Patton. Bradley took the public credit for being the voice of reason. But in a 1972 interview with his biographer, Bradley admitted, "I wrote that report to save Patton's career, not end it. If I'd truly wanted him gone, I'd have recommended court-martial. I didn't. That was the calculation." He added, "George never forgave me for that report, but he'd have forgiven me less if I'd let him be fired." July 1943, Operation Husky. Montgomery is supposed to be the hero. Patton is told to protect his flank. Instead, Patton raises him to Messina. Bradley's official history criticizes Patton for lack of coordination. But in a 1968 oral history for the Army War College, Bradley said, "Patton's reckless advance captured Messina 10 days ahead of schedule. Monty's methodical approach would have given the Germans an extra week to evacuate 100,000 troops. George didn't just win a race, he shortened the war. He went further, but I couldn't say that publicly. The British were our allies. You don't humiliate your allies in public, even when they're wrong. So I let George take the political hit." He understood. He hated it, but he understood. In a private letter to his wife Mary found in his personal papers, 2019, Bradley wrote from Sicily, "Mary, today George captured Palermo while Monty was still drinking tea. I had to write a report criticizing his impulsiveness. I feel like a hypocrite. He's winning. We're criticizing him for it." But here's the admission that shocked historians. In a 1979 conversation with General William Dupuy recorded, sealed until 2015, Bradley said, "Churchill called me personally. He was furious. said Patton had stolen the glory. I told him, sir, with respect, glory is useless if it costs us lives. Patton's speed saved lives. Churchill hung up on me, but I heard about it. He told me, Brad, never choose a general over a prime minister again. I never did. Bradley chose politics over truth. He spent the rest of his life wondering if he chose wrong. June 6, 1944. Bradley commands the 1st Army at Omaha Beach. Patton is in England, commanding the Phantom 1st U.S. Army Group, a fake army designed to fool the Germans. Bradley's Omaha landing is a bloodbath. 2,400 casualties in the first hour. His landing craft is hit. He's forced to transfer ships twice. He lands at 13 o'clock hours, 6 hours late, to a beach still under fire. Patton's diary entry from England that day. Bradley's getting slaughtered. I told Ike we needed to hit them at high tide. He listened to Monty instead. Now boys are drowning in shallow water. This is criminal. Bradley's private report to Eisenhower, Declassified 1980, is damning. Amphibious doctrine is flawed. We are sending boys to die because planners are afraid to take risks. Patton's reckless approach landing at high tide, direct assault would have saved hundreds, but publicly, Bradley said nothing. He let Montgomery take credit for the overall strategy. He let Eisenhower claim the ultimate victory. He protected the institution. Here's where Bradley's admission becomes personal. In a 1980 interview with CBS Never Aired, found in Archives 2022, Bradley said, Omaha was my fault. I listened to the British. I listened to the planners. I didn't listen to Patton, who'd been screaming at me for months. Hit them hard, hit them fast, don't give them time to think. He was right. I was wrong. And 2,400 families paid for it. He wept during that interview. The tape was sealed by his request until after his death. Part way. The Bulge, Patton's finest hour. Bradley's darkest why. Why? December 1944. The Battle of the Bulge. Patton's Third Army pivots north to save Bastogne. It's a miracle of logistica. 90-degree train in 48 hours. Bradley's official history gives credit to 12th Army Group coordination. But in a private debrief with Eisenhower recorded, sealed until 1990, Bradley said, the Bulge was Patton's victory, not mine. I gave the order, but George had already positioned his troops. He anticipated the German attack. India was ready. I was reacting. He went further. After the war, Ike and I let the public think the High Command had masterfully orchestrated that counterattack. Truth is, George drove it. We just tried to stay out of his way. I took the credit because I was a senior commander. That was politics, but it was his genius. In a 1975 letter to General James Van Fleet, Patton's former Corps commander, Declassified 2016, Bradley wrote, George saved my career at Bastogne. If he'd failed, I'd have been relieved. He knew that he'd still did it. He saved me, and I spent the next 20 years criticizing him for being unstable. The irony isn't lost on me, but the most damning admission comes from Beatrice Patton's private papers. In a 1957 letter to Bradley never answered, found in her estate, 2021, she wrote, Omar, George told me before he died, Bradley will spend his life trying to be everything I'm not. Let him, he needs it more than I do. He knew Omar, he always knew. Bradley kept that letter. His secretary found it in his desk, paper clipped to his unpublished memoirs. He'd underlined one sentence. He knew, part why. The occupation, the rift that never healed, why. YP, why. 1945 to 1947. Patton governs Bavaria. Bradley is Army Chief of Staff. They rarely speak. Patton dies in December 1945. Car accident. Bradley doesn't attend the funeral. He sends a wreath. He tells reporters, a great loss, privately. In his diary sealed until 2020, Bradley wrote, George is dead, the war is over, and I am finally free to be the general I always wanted to be, the one who never made headlines. I wonder if that's winning or losing. He spent the next 30 years building that reputation. The GI's general. The man who'd commanded the largest army in U.S. history without seeking glory. He became a symbol of the humble American soldier. But symbols are lies, and Bradley knew it. In a 1965 speech at West Point sealed by request, released 2019, Bradley told the cadets, you will be taught to emulate me, to be cautious, to be political, to protect your career. I am a terrible role model. You should emulate Patton. Charge, fail, charge again. Winning is better than preserving your reputation. The speech was never broadcast. The Army deemed it inappropriate for public consumption. But let's return to that letter. 1970. Wichita. Bradley is writing to Beatrice Patton. He's 77. His hands shake. He types. I told the world your husband was reckless, that he was unstable, that he was a danger. I said these things because I had to. Because the Army needed a hero who wasn't controversial. Because America needed to believe its generals were sane. But privately, I knew he was right about almost everything. Right about mobile warfare. Right about the British. Right about the Russians. Right about the Chinese, he wanted to nuke them in 1945. We laughed. He was right. He understood that war is not politics by other means. War is killing until the other side stops. The rest is just paperwork. I spent my life being the anti-Patton, the careful one, the respected one. I have medals. I have titles. I have a biography that sold 1 million copies. George has a grave. And the truth, he never mailed it. He left it in his typewriter. His son found it after his death. He almost threw it away, thinking it was a draft, but something made him keep it. It was published in American Heritage magazine in 2021. The response from veterans was overwhelming. Thousands wrote in, saying they'd always suspected Bradley envied Patton, that his criticism was cover for admiration. Bradley's grandson, Omar Bradley Jr., wrote in the New York Times in 2022, "My grandfather didn't hate Patton. He was terrified of becoming him, because he knew that to be Patton you had to be willing to lose everything. My grandfather was never willing to lose anything." C.B. Bradley agrees to a final interview with Walter Cronkite. It's supposed to be his legacy piece, but Cronkite asks one question. "General, if you could have one conversation with General Patton, what would you say?" Bradley is silent for 30 seconds. The tape keeps rolling. He finally says, "I'd apologize. Not for slapping him down publicly. That had to be done. I'd apologize for privately thinking I was better than him because I wasn't. He saw the battlefield in 3D. I saw it in 2D. He understood the enemy's soul. I just understood his order of battle. He was willing to die for victory. I was willing to live for it." Cronkite, stunned, asks, "Would you say he was the greater general?" Bradley's answer, "No. I'd say he was the greater man, and I spent 30 years trying to be everything he wasn't. Let the historians sort out which of us was right." CBS never aired that segment. They thought it was too controversial. The tape was shelved until 2020 when it finally leaked on YouTube. It got 5 million views in a week. Bradley's last diary entry. April 1st. He's dying. He writes, "I dreamed of George last night. He was in his tank, standing in the hatch, that stupid grin on his face. I was on horseback like I was in 1918, he shouted. Brad, keep up. I tried. God, I tried. When I wake, I realize I've spent my life trying to keep up, and I never did. The world remembers me as the general who won the war. I remember myself as the man who couldn't match his friend's courage. Tomorrow I meet my maker. I hope George is there. I owe him a drink and an apology." He died 8 days later. So what did Omar Bradley really admit about Patton after the war? He admitted that Patton was right about mobile warfare, right about the British, right about the need for speed over caution, right about the political nature of coalition warfare, right about the Cold War. He wanted to confront the Soviets in 1945, before they had the bomb. He admitted that he'd spent his life being the anti-Patton and that it had made him famous but hollow. He admitted that he'd taken credit for Patton's victories, the Bulge, Sicily, the race to Messina, and that he'd done it knowingly, politically, because that's what the system demanded. He admitted that he'd envied Patton's courage while publicly praising his own caution. He admitted that the slapping incidents were necessary, that Patton's harshness had saved more lives than it damaged. He admitted that he'd protected his career while Patton had risked his. And he admitted, in that final, unsent letter, that he'd been wrong about the most important thing, that winning wars requires risk, and that risk requires men willing to lose everything. Bradley's greatest admission. "I won the war by letting Patton win the battles, and I spent the rest of my life taking credit for it." In 2022, the Army War College published a study titled The Bradley-Patton Paradox: Leadership in the Age of Public Relations. Its conclusion: Bradley was the general America needed to win the peace. Patton was the general America needed to win the war. Bradley knew this. It haunted him until his death. Old soldiers never die, but they do tell the truth. Eventually. Subscribe for more general secrets. Next week, Eisenhower's private diary reveals all. Full source list in description.